The Ascended Masters, spirits like Jesus, Buddha, Merlin the Magician, and someone called Rayolite, bring prophet visions of destruction. The Soviet Union, she believes, is planning a first nuclear strike. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are riding across the land.
And as you know, these four horsemen bring problems in the economy. They bring war, they bring death, they bring famine, they bring plague.
See, the hypocrisy is in the leader. I'm not saying they do. And she is even sincere. I think she believes that she is a deity, that these masters speak through her. But a lot of their prophecies are based on dictations from Jesus, Buddha, Mother Mary, masters that we may identify with. They are prophecies of cataclysm.
Saint Germain and Jesus dear, hold my hand with Moria's here.
Unless you're not familiar with New Age spirituality, you probably heard of the concept of ascended masters. But have you ever asked yourself, where did it all come from? Well, I did. So one day, I decided to go down the rabbit hole and discover the origins of this interesting spiritual belief. What appear to be highly evolved cosmic beings striving to help humans awaken from this world of illusion were instead charismatic spiritual gurus with a knack for great fictional storytelling. It can be traced back to an eccentric Russian noblewoman and two mysterious Indian yogis some speculate never even existed. Nonetheless, it will be through them future New Age gurus would take major inspiration from to develop their ascended masters mythology. In the 19th century, there was a new social religious movement called spiritualism that took over the minds of Americans and Europeans. These often fraudulent psychic mediums impressed many gullible Westerners with their ability to contact the dead. But a skeptical New York journalist by the name of Henry Steele Olcott was yet to be impressed. So in 1874, he traveled to a small farm in Vermont to investigate the claims of the famous Eddy brothers, where for more than 2 months he witnessed hundreds of spirit materializations which he believed to be genuine. But the person that would change the course of his life forever was a chain-smoker Russian named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Unlike Olcott, Blavatsky was already a believer of spiritualism, and when invited to join in with the Eddy brothers, took the opportunity to flex her spiritual skills, and that's when her psychic mediumship took center stage. In that moment, she brought forth spirits like an Islamic scholar, a Russian soldier, and several Indian gurus that dwarfed anything the Eddy brothers could muster up. At this point, Olcott was thoroughly convinced of the credibility of spiritualism that would soon enough become Blavatsky's first disciple. A year later, in 1875, Blavatsky and Olcott, with the help of a young student of the occult named William Q. Judge, officially established the Theosophical Society. What should be understood, in the 19th century, spiritualism lacked a central philosophy. It was essentially a bunch of people running around freely claiming to be psychics, and you can already guess how that turned out. With the release of Isis Unveiled in 1877, Blavatsky and his society wanted to take spiritualism to the next level by introducing a more sophisticated belief system. Today, in modern Western spirituality, beliefs that are drawn from Hinduism and Buddhism are extremely common. What some people may not know is the huge role the Theosophical Society played in bringing those ideas to Western audiences. And it was a trip to India in 1879 when the society became more influenced by Eastern mystical traditions and would even move their headquarters to Adyar in 1882. Whilst in India, they caught the attention of newspaper editor Alfred Percy Sinnett, who was very much intrigued by the Russian mystic. Sinnett soon invited both of them to his summer home in Simla. The details of that visit was documented in his book The Occult World. Then one day, things got strange for Sinnett. He began receiving letters from hidden yogi masters known as Mahatmas, which later became known as the Mahatma letters. And what was odd was how some of these letters apparently materialized out of thin air. But who were these mysterious yogis? Blavatsky claimed she was initiated by certain elder brothers of humanity during her travels in the East. One of them was an Indian prince named Mahatma Maurya, and the other was a Kashmiri Brahmin named Mahatma Kudumi. According to Blavatsky, the Theosophical teachings all came from these Eastern masters. In 1891, Blavatsky wrote, "Every word of esoteric information found in this work or in my later writings come from the teachings of our Eastern masters, and many a passage in these works has been written by me under their dictation." However, it must be stated, not everyone took her words for face value. Research work of paranormal phenomena Richard Hodgson had this to say: "I was unable while in India to secure various Mahatma documents for my own examination, and after a minute and prolonged comparison of these with Madame Blavatsky's handwriting, have not the slightest doubt that all the documents which I thus had the opportunity of examining were, with the exception of one, written by Madame Blavatsky. The Hodgson report may have tarnished the reputation of the society, but it didn't stop them. In 1888, Blavatsky would release her most important work, The Secret Doctrine. 3 years later, at the age of 59, Madame Blavatsky passed away in London at the home of her disciple, Annie Besant, a British social activist who did a lot to corrupt the original Theosophical teachings. After Blavatsky's death, her closest friend and co-founder of the Theosophical Society, William Q. Judge, became embroiled in a bitter dispute with Occult and Besant, accusing them of straying away from the original teachings of the Mahatmas. In 1895, Judge departed from the Indian Adya faction, headed by Occult, and became the leader of the American Theosophical Society. Less than a year later, on March 21st, he too passed away. And that's when the second generation took over. Although Occult continued as president until his death in 1907, the society was soon dominated by Besant and the controversial former priest Charles Webster Leadbeater. In 1906, Leadbeater, a self-proclaimed clairvoyant, was forced to resign from the society after admitting to performing indecent acts on young boys in his care. However, through the heavy support of Besant, he was readmitted 2 years later. Under Leadbeater's guidance, Theosophy was subtly Christianized in a manner that would have horrified Blavatsky. The Mahatmas now existed in an elaborate occult hierarchy presided over by a Christian-inspired trinity, as explained by its biographer, Gregory Tillett. The 7 masters principally concerned with the government of the world on the inner planes exist on the level of the 6th initiation, the Chowan initiation, but above them stand the 3 principal officers in the administration of the world from an occult point of view, the Mahachohan, the Bodhisattva, and the Manu. These are on the level of the 7th initiation. The 8th is that of the Buddha, above whom comes the Lord of the world. At the very top of the occult bureaucracy stands the trinity of the Logos of our solar system. Leadbeater's 7 Chohans were Master Moria, Master Kuthumi, Master the Venetian, Master Serapis, Master Ilarion, Master Jesus, and Master Rakosi. And these 7 would all find their way into the later Ascended Masters' teachings. Former Christian missionary Alice Bailey was another prominent Theosophist who was heavily inspired by the pseudo-Theosophy of Besant and Leadbeater. However, she would soon be removed from office after insisting she also received direct messages from the Masters. Shortly after, she founded the Arcane School in 1923, which leaned even more towards Christian esotericism. Bailey's work has had an immense amount of influence on New Age teachings. If Blavatsky was the grandmother of the New Age movement, Alice Bailey will be his mother. But the person that ultimately introduced the world to the concept of Ascended Masters was a former mining engineer named Guy Warren Ballard. See, in the late 19th and early 20th century, myths and speculations surrounding an 18th century European mystic traveler called Count of Saint Germain was widespread amongst occult circles. In 1930, Ballard claimed he came face to face with this particular immortal mystic whilst resting from his hike on Mount Shasta. Soon enough, him and his wife Edna Ballard started the I Am Activity cult, where he would act as a divine messenger for the Ascended Master, now simply known as Saint Germain, who is connected to the 7th Chohan, Master Rakosi, mentioned by Leadbeater. Let's break down some of the differences between the original Theosophical Mahatmas and Ballard's Ascended Masters. The first thing that comes to mind is the Mahatma's lack of concern for mundane human affairs. Madame Blavatsky had this to say on that matter. The Masters will not stoop for one moment to give a thought to individual private matters relating but to 1 or even 10 persons, their welfare, woes, and blisses in this world of Maya, to nothing except questions of really universal importance. It's all you Theosophists who have dragged down in your minds the ideals of our Masters. You have unconsciously and with the best intentions and full sincerity of good purpose desecrated them by thinking for one moment and believing that they would trouble themselves with your business matters, sons to be born, daughters to be married, houses to be built. And another distinction is, the Theosophical Mahatmas make it well known that they are not godlike beings that can easily bypass the immutable laws of the universe. Mahatma Kuthumi writes, "If we had the powers of the imaginary personal God, and the universal and immutable laws were but toys to play with, then indeed might we have created conditions that would have turned this earth into an Arcadia for lofty souls." Blavatsky further makes it clear that the Mahatmas are anything but immortal souls. As she writes, "They are living men, born as we are born, and doomed to die like every mortal." In today's spiritual teachings, when people are speaking of ascending into higher realms, they're not talking of a physical body ascension, but that's exactly what Guy Ballard was insisting would happen to the people who reached the immortal status he had reached. Ballard preached to his flock that they would ascend into heaven like Jesus, but when Ballard experienced a physical death and not a bodily ascension in 1939, the I Am Activity movement would never be the same again. People became disillusioned, followed by accusations of mail fraud. The group would eventually fall into obscurity. But the Ascended Masters would find a new home in a new cult. In 1944, a member of the I Am movement in New York, Geraldine Innocente, claimed she was contacted by Ascended Master El Moria, whom Blavatsky called Mahatma Moria. She began giving messages from the Master, but only to a select group of people. But in the early 1950s, members of the I Am New York faction, led by Innocente, broke away and established a bridge to freedom. They wanted to translate the teachings into other languages, especially Spanish, but Ballard was always against that idea. However, on June 21, 1961, Innocente died from an accidental overdose of medication, but some say she committed suicide. Fortunately for the Ascended Masters, there was another willing messenger ready to step up to share their divine wisdom, and his name was Mark L. Prophet, who teamed up with Francis Ike, a former prominent Bridge to Freedom member, to establish a new group, the Lighthouse to Freedom. Mark Prophet gave live real-time dictations before selected groups, but he was only an anonymous contact to the members of the Lighthouse organization. Soon he would split from Ike and began publicly calling himself a messenger for the Ascended Masters, and in 1958 founded the Summit Lighthouse organization. But there was one more missing piece to the puzzle, and that was a Christian scientist by the name of Elizabeth Clare Wolfe. And according to her, she had received a message from Ascended Master El Moria, who told her, "I have a need of a feminine messenger. Go to Washington to be trained." Wolfe would meet Prophet for the first time in 1961 and married him 2 years later. The Prophets carried on the ultra-patriotic traditions of the Ballard's I Am Activity movement. Dictations predicted it was the destiny of the United States to bring spiritual enlightenment to the rest of the world. In February 1973, Mark L. Prophet died and became the Ascended Master known as Lenello. In 1975, Elizabeth Prophet founded the Church of Universal and Triumphant, which became the parent organization for the Summit Lighthouse. Elizabeth Clare continued to expand the movement, but just like her predecessors, she was involved in various image-damaging controversies throughout her spiritual career. Prophet was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in November 1998 and died on October 15, 2009, and is now known as Ascended Lady Master Claire de Lys. Today, many spiritualists on social media claim they're in contact with Ascended Masters, but how much of that is true? I'll let you decide for yourself.